Good morning. KJ7T is in the booth. Today's podcast, Random Wire Reflections, covers the Random Wire Review issue 103 coming out on Friday, August 16th. As I got my morning coffee today, I was reflecting on the 50th anniversary of my high school senior class. We had 518 kids in our class, and in our reunion planning, we projected maybe 120 people would give us a break even on costs and expected maybe 135 people to show up. But there's a lesson in here that applies to amateur radio clubs too. Our president picked up the phone and called every person we had in the database for whom we had a phone number. So he called more than 200 people, and the net result of that was people showed up. We had more than 200 people attend, but more importantly, we had numerous volunteers for the event that we did not expect, and so it went off without a hitch. And I think the lesson for amateur radio clubs is much the same. Not everybody wants to be an officer. Not everybody wants the month in, month out drudgery and responsibility of serving as an officer. But when there's a special event or something that requires volunteers from the club, one of the tactics that can work really well is to simply ask individuals, will you help? That personal appeal, not to the group, but to the individual, seems to be very powerful, and it certainly worked for us on our high school class reunion. Topics today include AllStarLink audio interface Restomod. This is the Kenwood PC-1A phone controller box that I'm trying to turn into an AllStarLink audio interface. Tools. I bought 2 inexpensive multimeters because I could not find one of my preferred multimeters, and so I take the opportunity to compare them. XHDATA Radios. I have 2 radios I compare side by side in issue 103. A few random observations, a few notes on IT security, and then in the miscellaneous category are 3 items: an inline switch for DC current, Replacement WishMesh Pocket Mesh-tastic device, and a new-to-me Ten-Tec Scout 555 is on the way. So first up is the AllStarLink audio interface Restomod. What is a Restomod? Let me describe what I mean by that word. Resto refers to restoration, implying older vintage equipment. Mod is for modification, but also think modern. Restomodding is the process of converting an old piece of equipment so that it has modern capabilities, making it function like something new while retaining the outward appearance of the original. Wikipedia has a reference to Restomod in the context of automobile restoration, and I quote, Restomod, classic cars that combine original exterior styling with modern applied technologies, such as new suspension wheels, transmission, or modern interior features, such as multimedia, etc., for comfortable everyday use. In the context of this amateur radio project, I am restomodding a Kenwood PC-1A phone patch controller case to function as a modern AllStarLink radioless audio interface. To do this, of course, requires parts, and there are some new parts from the list I described last week in Random Wire Review issue 102. Those parts include the Kenwood PC-1A phone patch controller box, a Master Communications RL20 radio adapter board, a 6-wire quick connector, a MAX 9814 amplifier, a PAM 8406 amplifier, a 5 kiloohm potentiometer, an LM386 mono amplifier, and an assortment of electrolytic capacitors. Added to the list since last week are the LM386 mono amp and the electrolytic capacitors. So far, I've removed the following items from the PC-1A box: the original board from the PC-1A, a front panel switch, a rear panel plate, and the power cord. Still left mounted to the case are the 8-pin microphone connector, a view meter, 2 potentiometers on the front, a sliding switch on the back panel, and another potentiometer on the back panel. With regard to amplifiers, I did find a few of these items in my parts bin. The LOSC brand PAM8406 board is one I picked up a few years ago, and it turns out I have a baggie full of XL6009 buck boosters. That was a surprise. I had forgotten about those. The PAM8406 board can be configured as a Class D amplifier or a Class AB amp. The defaults on the board are A, Class D amp, B, shutdown disabled, and C, mute disabled. All those are fine, so I won't have to change the defaults. The marks that look like fingerprints on the bottom of the board, as shown in issue 103, well, that's how it came from the overseas vendor. As I started to fiddle with how the PAM8406 board would fit, I discovered that the board is so long that it interferes with the second potentiometer mounting hole in the front of the case. Instead of using the board I already have, I ordered a couple of smaller units called the Noyito, Noyito, PAM8406 digital amplifier board, 5-watt dual channel stereo audio module. It's essentially the PAM8406 board without the potentiometer. And that leads me to potentiometers. Using that smaller PAM8406 board should give me room to use two 5 kiloohm potentiometers on the front panel. A fallback would be to put one of the pots on the back panel and use that location for adjusting microphone gain, but that is less convenient than having it on the front panel. I think it makes the most sense to put the potentiometer for the PAM8406 amp in the RX gain position. That would control volume to the external speaker. The TX gain position would have the other pot to allow microphone gain to be boosted through a MAX 9814 board. At this point, I hit pause and looked at the case and decided to remove the original pots from the PC1A front panel to make it easier to see the positions I'm describing. RX for the external speaker volume and TX for the microphone gain. There's a picture of this in issue 103. The original potentiometer knobs fit the modern pots well enough, so I'll try to use them to help maintain the illusion of an older device. The new 5 kiloohm pots fit well in these two holes. I find that I am out of electrolytic capacitors. I could use one on the 8-pin microphone connector and another on the feed to the view meter. Capacitors should help smooth out the operation of these devices. I ordered an assortment so I won't run dry, and there's a picture of those in issue 103. Topic number 2 is tools. I think my halfway decent multimeter is in storage somewhere, so I did the unthinkable. I drove to my local Harbor Freight store and bought a new multimeter. Why? Convenience, pure and simple. It looks durable and comes with a case. For my general use, household and vehicles, it is more meter than I need. For amateur radio work, it should be sufficient for most tasks, even if measurements prove to be a bit off. There's simply no telling how accurate, precise, or durable this multimeter is. For tool reviews, I often turn to the tool guide, that's TOOLGUYD, but for the DM1000 meter from Harbor Freight, that site has little meaningful information. The DM1000 is alleged to be a rebadged Unitrans UT61E, a meter that gets decent reviews. Could I have done better? Certainly. Was there a convenient place to just pop in and buy a reasonable multimeter? Not really. Harbor Freight met my requirements today. I'm sure I'll hear some comments about trusting anything from Harbor Freight. I've certainly had that opinion in the past. Today, though, it feels like the overall quality is a bit better than in years past, at least with some thoughtful examination of the products by the person shopping. Despite this disclaimer that says I feel better about Harbor Freight, I also ordered a less expensive, read that as cheap, multimeter for overnight delivery. This one may live in the pickup truck. It's a Kaiweets digital multimeter, TRMS 6000 counts, voltmeter, auto-ranging, fast, accurately measures voltage, current, amp, resistance, diodes, continuity, duty cycle, capacitance, temperature for automotive. This particular item is part of a deal that includes a wire stripper, and hey, one can never have too many wire strippers. Unlike the Ames multimeter from Harbor Freight, the Kaiweets device does not come with a case. I took a few minutes to compare the two multimeters, looking basically at the physical characteristics of the two devices, the more expensive Ames DM1000 at about $70, and the cheaper Kaiweet HT118A at $40. I am not equipped to offer an opinion on the accuracy, precision, or reliability of these units. The Kaiweets unit takes two AA batteries accessible through a panel on the back of the device. A single screw secures the door to the battery compartment. The Ames device is similar, except it takes a single 9-volt battery. The form factor and size are similar between the Kaiweets HT118A and the Ames DM1000 devices. I have a side-by-side picture in issue 103. However, the Ames device weighs about half again as much as the Kaiweets. Frankly, the Ames meter feels solid, and the Kaiweets feels cheaper, as in lighter in weight and more plasticky feeling. The wire leads for the probes are not the kind that seem to adhere to each other. That drives me nuts. The insulation on the Ames probe leads feel a little more rubbery and substantial than with the Kaiweets device. But both sets of leads are adequate. Both devices also come with a temperature measuring probe. The main dial control functions fine on both units, but the display on the Ames device is simpler and less crowded. To my eyes, it is simply easier to read. The displays are quite readable for both devices. Both devices claim to be true RMS devices. Both boast max voltages of 1000 volts CAT3 and 600 volts CAT4. Both have max 600 milliamp fuses, and both claim to have 6,000 counts. Interestingly, both devices have a non-contact voltage detection feature. I tried that and found that the two devices differ in how they display non-contact voltage, or NCV, detections. The Kaiweets device seems simpler. Turn the dial to the NCV live position and hold the sensor at the top of the device near the circuit you want to test. In the gallery in issue 103, you'll see that the light switch in the off position generated a different response than when the light switch was on. For the Ames device, the NCV procedure was a bit less clear. Turn the dial to any position and hold down the NCV button. The meter did not differentiate between the light switch in the off position and in the on position. The Kaiweets device seems a bit more intuitive in actual use because the dial includes the NCV setting and because it has the small nubbin on the top of the meter to indicate where the sensor is. I think the difference between the green light and the red light on the Kaiweets device is the green light is indicating a circuit is present, and the red light indicates electricity is flowing through the circuit. This is an interpretation on my part, as this is not described well in the tiny manual included with the multimeter. For homeowners checking residential circuits, the Kaiweet HT118A meter seems a bit easier to use. Of the two, the more expensive Ames meter feels heavier and more solid, the main dial is less clicky, and the probe leads are slightly more substantial. Still, for a toolbox meter for the household or vehicle, the Kaiweets may represent a good value. Just be sure to put it into a case of some kind to protect it and to keep the parts together. I'll give the overall nod to the Ames DM1000 multimeter. It feels more substantial overall. The dial feels and sounds not too clicky. The leads are more substantial, and it comes with a case. The Ames unit feels like it might survive a drop or two compared to the Kaiweets device. However, no drop tests were performed to test this conclusion. The third item in issue 103 is XHDATA Radios. I really didn't expect to have 3 XHDATA radios. I thought I'd just try one, the D808, but then XHDATA offered the D608WB and the D220 for me to review. The D808 satisfies my desire for airband coverage. There's a side-by-side picture with the D808 beside the D608WB in issue 103. Overall, I'm really liking the D808 and D608WB radios. While the D808 is not quite the same as a Texan brand radio, it is perfectly fine for my occasional use. My Texan radio lives in the camp trailer where we depend on it for information when cell coverage is poor. The D808 was well reviewed on swling.com. The 608WB radio is actually a fine unit. This type of radio is intended to be kept on hand for use in emergencies. As such, the radio needs an alternate means of charging, a flashlight, and reasonable performance on AM and FM bands. NOAA weather alert is a must, and shortwave reception is a plus. The 608WB checks all of these boxes and more. Charge it over a USB-C connection, or with a hand crank on the back, or with the solar panel on top. It uses a standard 18650 size battery, so it's easy to keep a spare on hand. It has the obligatory flashlight, but also has a variable output LED light underneath the solar panel, good for area lighting in a tent or for late night reading. By the way, the solar panel tilts, so you can capture the most energy from the sun. You can pick up a D608WB from Amazon for not a whole lot of money. This unit feels solid, performs well, and has all the features I want in an emergency radio. I like this little unit more than any other emergency radio I've tried. It's a keeper. I'm listening to it while I write this. I have plugged a micro SD card into the radio, holding dozens of my favorite albums, and it is playing in the background for my wife and me as I write this. I'm still reviewing the D220, so more on that to come. Under the topic of random observations, I observe that we hams are a funny bunch. When friends call each other on the phone, they don't lapse into descriptions of their gear. Quote, I'm calling on a Samsung model SM-G781U via my home Wi-Fi using a headset that's a bit of a home brew, unquote. No, people just don't do that, but we hams do exactly this when we talk to each other on the radio. That, and report on our local weather and compare health issues. I also note that cell phone manufacturers have done a tremendous job with what I'll call automatic gain control, AGC. AGC automatically adjusts the strength of an input. On the smartphones I've used, one can talk close to a microphone or several inches from it, and on the receiving end, it can be hard to tell if the talker is close to the mic or not. Not so with our amateur radio gear. Distance from a microphone makes a huge difference in audio quality. I routinely hear stations with audio that is distorted because the person speaking has their lips up to the microphone and is speaking too loudly. Checking our own audio using a parrot ought to be part of our regular radio practice, even if only once a year. I did just try a parrot at 41619 on Wires X, but got no response. I'm looking for other Wires X parrots, and suggestions are welcome. Under the topic of security, I have a couple of items. Will the 0.0.0.0 day bug affect AllStarLink nodes? This thought surfaced as I was reading a security article titled 0.0.0.0 day exploiting localhost APIs from the browser. In the configuration of AllStarLink nodes, sometimes we use 0.0.0.0 as the IP address in a configuration file. For example, my manager.conf file has the bind address set as 0.0.0.0. Binding the IP to 0.0.0.0 provides no additional security beyond the username and password for the node. I'm not particularly worried about this on my home node because A, I'm operating inside my local network, and B, I use a VPN to reach the node from outside the network. Setting the bind address to 0.0.0.0 is a convenience for me. Is there risk in doing this? I suppose there is, but I deem it an acceptable risk for my use case. The other security topic is on multilayered attacks. Recently, an entity I work with was affected by bad actors. In popular parlance, they got hacked and lost a chunk of money. The attack vector started out as you might expect. Someone clicked a link they should not have clicked, but it escalated from there to a much more sophisticated operation. I'm still gathering information on this, but wanted to get this warning out to my subscribers. Be careful what you click. Bad actors are becoming more surgical in their approach and more convincing in their interactions with you. If you have not yet enabled multi-factor authentication, also known as MFA, now is the time to do so. I resisted doing this for quite a long time because having to enter something more than my username and password seemed like too much bother. Considering the potential for harm, though, it really isn't too much bother. If nothing else, you should at least have MFA enabled for your email and banking and investment services. I also now use random passwords, MFA, and USB security keys to help protect my assets. Under the topic of miscellaneous, I have 3 items. I bought an inline switch for my Behringer mic and preamp combo that I bought from a seller on Amazon. That package came with a power supply that did not work, and that might be why I got it for such a great price. Fortunately, I already had a suitable power supply for one of my Dell Wise 3040 thin client units that worked perfectly with the Behringer package. However, to power up the preamp, you plug the 2.1mm male plug into the receptacle on the back of the preamp. Alternatively, you can keep that plugged in and plug in and remove the wall wart from a 120 volt socket. Neither methods are convenient and both introduce wear on these components. So I bought a package of inexpensive inline switches. I gambled that the 5.5mm by 2.1mm plugs on the switch would work well with the Behringer unit, and it works great. This lets me keep the Behringer preamp plugged in at all times. When I need to use it, I power it up by flipping the switch. When I don't need it, I power it off. I don't know if this introduces noise into the audio circuit, but so far it's been fine. This is my kind of solution, simple and effective. Here's another plus. This switch, there were 4 in the package, fits some of my Dell Wise 3040 thin client devices too. My second miscellaneous topic is I received my replacement WishMesh Pocket Meshtastic device. On Tuesday, I received the replacement from Rockland Tech. I reported on the original unit in issue 100. The one point in common with the 2 rack-based Meshtastic devices that have failed is my USB-C charger. For the new WishMesh Pocket device, I'm charging on a very low-powered charger. We'll see if that makes a difference. Kudos to Rockland Tech for their help. The replacement device worked right out of the box. The third item is a new-to-me Ten-Tec Scout 555. Buying something off eBay is always a bit of a crapshoot, isn't it? I rolled the dice and purchased a well-used Ten-Tec Scout 555 transceiver. I do like a simple radio. In the photos, the case looks a bit rugged in spots, but the front panel, display, knobs, and rear panel look perfectly pristine. I have another old Scout 555 that I reported on in issue 96 that may not be working quite right, so what's in my mind is a bit of mix and matching to make a good working machine. At the very least, I'll be able to compare side-by-side performance to see if there actually is a difference between the 2 Scout 555 units. With that, it's time to close. I thank you for subscribing to the Random Wire newsletter. 73 to each and every one of you. This is KJ7T, and I'm clear.